Many of you good folks who tune into my little weekly musings on the climate crisis our world is facing already have a pretty clear understanding of the issues and impacts involved. But the two questions I get asked perhaps more often than any others are, firstly, where can I find concise, easily understandable facts and figures to combat the misunderstandings, misconceptions and myths that get thrown at me when I'm talking to friends and family about climate change? And secondly, how can I most effectively present the facts to people in a way that will convince them of the validity of the consensus science? And they're both perfectly reasonable questions. Debunking myths and delving into the psychology of propaganda is not something that I've really gone into in any detail over the years, but I do know a man who has. He's called Dr. John Cook, and he founded a website called Skeptic Science back in 2007. Earlier this year, Dr. Cook published this book designed specifically to be a user-friendly, humorous guide written in plain, everyday language to explain the concepts and to help overcome the sometimes illogical objections to climate science of otherwise perfectly rational people. I caught up with Dr. Cook last week via a web chat to talk about his academic work and career and to delve a bit more deeply into some of the very useful information and tips outlined in the book. So, let's dive straight in and see what it's all about. Good. Well, very well welcome to Dr. John Cook from the Skeptical Science website and many other things. We've not spoken before, so welcome to the channel, Dr. Cook. Can I call you John? Is that okay?
Please do. Dr. Cook is way too formal.
Okay, good. John it is. That suits me nicely. So, John, I suspect a lot of people watching will have already seen your work and know you well, but some won't. So for the benefit of those who don't know you, could you just give us a quick brief rundown of your academic career and your career so far? Because it's quite a nice mix of science and the arts, isn't it?
I began my career studying physics at the University of Queensland, and then after finishing my honours year, I went into cartooning for a decade, which is kind of not the natural progression from physics to cartooning, but I enjoyed it. Then I went back into science again, doing a PhD in communication, psychology and cognitive science. And now my research is focused on climate communication, but I'm also combining the arts and combining cartooning and creative communication with science.
So you obviously your accent belies the fact that you're an Australian by origin, but you're based in America now, I take it.
Yeah, I moved here in 2017. I arrived in the US a week after Donald Trump's inauguration. So
okay.
I came here in an interesting time.
There's 2 or 3 books that you've co-written in the past as well, which were quite relevant to the climate change agenda. Am I right in that?
Yeah, the more recent textbook I wrote was with Daniel Bedford, who's a geography professor in Utah, and we wrote a climate change textbook, but the approach of it was based on misconception-based learning, which is teaching the science by addressing misconceptions and misinformation about science.
That led on, because I've also seen that there's an online course that I think you more or less put together, didn't you, for the University of Queensland, am I right?
They had just started doing MOOCs, these massive open online courses, and I found them really intriguing. And I was just talking to the director of my centre one day saying, one day down the track, preferably after I finish my PhD, it would be nice to do a MOOC about climate misinformation and climate science denial. And unbeknownst to me, he started making that happening. And within a few weeks, people were coming up to me saying, I hear you're doing a MOOC. And I was like, am I? What? And then, I ended up putting my PhD on hold for about a year while I put this MOOC together, not just by myself, but with the MOOC team at the University of Queensland, and also a whole team of professors scattered all around the world that were part of the Skeptical Science team.
I just wanted to touch on Skeptical Science itself just for a moment, if we can, before we get to the book, because obviously it's something. It's a website that I've referred to on many occasions in the 2 or 3 years when I've been doing this work online. I've found it an invaluable reference source for all sorts of things, and So just give us a steer on that, if you can, about what motivated you to start that, because it's an awful lot of work.
I started the site in 2007, and the catalyst for it was basically getting into arguments with my father-in-law. So we, at a family get-together, he would start throwing these climate myths at me. He didn't believe that climate change was happening. And I went away and started researching all the different arguments that he was presenting. And I would like to say that I started a Skeptical Science for noble reasons, but really at the beginning it was about beating my father-in-law in an argument. But as I was researching it and I was building a database of all the different possible arguments I might encounter and what the science said about each one, what was the relevant peer-reviewed research, it started to dawn on me that other people might find this a useful resource as well, because we all have cranky uncles or fathers-in-law or relatives or friends or family that don't follow the science, and having the science at our fingertips is a useful resource.
And it's grown over the years. There's a big team now on the books, as far as I can see. And are they people you've met over the years and come into contact with, and they've sort of come on board and wanted to contribute, or how does that work?
No, not exactly. When I started the site, and I was just blogging by myself and posting these rebuttals by myself, and there was a lot of work, and the misinformation kept flowing, and I was struggling to keep up with it, especially as I was just doing this in my spare time. Gavin Schmidt, who's a NASA scientist who runs the blog Real Climate, he had just posted a blog post saying that we should communicate our science at multiple levels. And he used the analogy of ski slopes, where you have a green slope, a blue slope, and a black slope as a way of denoting different difficulty levels. Okay. He said we really should do that for our science communication, have a green slope explanation and a blue slope explanation and an advanced explanation. So I posted a blog post on Skeptical Science saying, I want to create multiple level debunkings of climate misinformation. And immediately overnight, I got a flood of people who volunteered to basically they thought, I think I could do a better job than you at explaining this.
Right. Yeah. Bring it on then. See what you can do.
That's right. And I learned a lot just from that experience. Peer-reviewed research isn't 100% perfect, but it is the most reliable information we have, because it is essentially like spam filters on steroids. So peer review is the most rigorous way of checking content, by getting experts to check other experts' work. And even going a step beyond that, science is most robust when results get replicated by other scientists, ideally with using different methods. And so a single peer-reviewed paper is a good source of information. Multiple peer-reviewed studies is the ideal form of source of information, because then you have replication, and the more a result gets replicated, the more confident you can be that it's true. But then, it's super important for research to be relevant, that it gets translated in a way that's understandable to the general public. Yeah,
indeed. The book, which for those of people who haven't seen it, I have got myself my own copy, which I've read with great interest, and even taken little notes at the top how he organises that. So
that's what every book author likes to see, little post-it notes.
I read your book, look. But it's there's so much in there. It looks, on first view, it looks like a great book, comic book, going to be funny and what have you. And it is. It's extremely well written. There's so much in there, but there's so much information in there as well that's why I end up with a lot of tabs at the top. So congratulations, number one, on writing such a great piece of work, and thank you from all of us who are struggling to get the climate message across, for yet another thing that's going to help us greatly in doing that. Are the same motivations that drove you to this, that drove you to do Skeptical Science? Was your father-in-law still not having it, or what was happening?
Through the course of doing Skeptical Science, I learned that there was a science-to-science communication, people giving me feedback on the relevant psychological research. Okay. And that took me down the rabbit hole of doing psychological research, doing the PhD. And coming out of the PhD, the main thing I learned was that inoculation is the key to stopping science denial. You you stop misinformation from spreading by basically exposing people to a weakened form of the misinformation. And out of my PhD, since about 2016, I've been researching how do you inoculate. I collaborated with some critical thinking philosophers at the University of Queensland, and they introduced me to the idea of parallel argumentation, which is basically using analogies to explain bad logic. So you take bad logic from a misinforming argument and you transplant it into a parallel situation. And often the more absurd or extreme that parallel situation, the clearer it is, the initial logic. And while we were working together, I realized that this is what late night comedians do every night. They debunk some public figure's ridiculous statement of the day, saying, so-and-so said this. Well, that's just like being in this situation.
Trump also had some words of praise for his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani.
Greatest mayor in the history of New York. He knows corruption really better than anybody.
You don't want him to know that.
That's the thing. Yeah, that's kind of the problem. That's like saying Thanos is an expert at population control.
And everyone laughs. They can see the immediate flaw in the logic.
Yeah.
You don't have to explain all the facts and all the nuance. You can show how an argument is wrong very clearly and elegantly in an entertaining way through using parallel arguments. And I realized that cartoons were the perfect delivery mechanism for debunking misinformation in the form of these parallel arguments. So I started drawing cartoons.
I mentioned earlier in the MOOC that you talked about just now that there was a quite an important principle, which is this acronym FLICK, and it comes through in the book as well. Can you just talk us through where that comes from, what those each of those letters stands for, and why it's such a powerful acronym in the book?
So FLICK came from originally Mark Hufnagel. He ran a blog called Science Denial, and he suggested that amongst all the different movements that deny scientific consensus, you see these 5 common techniques. And so I started incorporating that framework into my own explanation of misinformation. And then one day I was invited to give a workshop to I think it was the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. So it was climate activists, but young people. And so I thought I need an acronym. I need a way to explain these 5 techniques of science denial in a way that they'll remember it and it makes it kind of sticky and more accessible. So I was thinking, all right, well, there's fake experts, there's unrealistic expectations, there's cherry picking. Oh, this is not going in a way that's suitable. And so I just kept working on it until I came up with FLICK. So the 5 techniques of science denial are fake experts, logical fallacies, impossible expectations, cherry picking, and conspiracy theories. And that acronym has kind of been the foundation of a lot of my work ever since.
What I don't want to do is to go through the whole book and ruin it for someone who wants to get the book and discover it for themselves, because it's well worth investing and reading through. And I know there's some online stuff that you do as well, which we can talk about later. But I've just picked out 2 or 3 concepts from the book that struck me as being worthy of a bit of extra commentary from yourself. One of which is this perfect psychological storm.
Yeah, the perfect psychological storm. Firstly, that phrase was an excuse for me to draw that iconic scene from The Perfect Storm where the boat's going up the big wave. But what I'm referring to is that climate change is this combination of all these different things that even one of them would make it hard for us to solve this problem. But with climate change, you've got all these different things. You've got the fact that psychologically we're hardwired to deal with immediate problems. So the fact that climate change is global and it's long-term and it's created by everyone, and it's the opposite of the typical threat that the human brain is equipped to deal with. So at a fundamental psychological level, it's difficult. But then you also have vested interests and ideological groups teaming up together and throwing billions of dollars at confusing the public. So even if you didn't have all the psychological challenges in the first place, you have all these misinformation campaigns that are also making it really difficult to solve the problem.
And then there's once we've got to the top of the perfect wave, there's a slippery slope fallacy, which just to sort of continue the analogy. So that intrigued me as well, which is, again, it's obfuscation again, isn't it? But it's saying, oh, if you do this, then is that what you want to happen, sort of?
Yeah, so in the book I do talk about a whole range of different fallacies, but I think in the case of climate denial, the slippery slope fallacy is kind of the foundational fallacy that drives it, because the people who deny climate science don't really deny it because of any actual objection about the science. It's because they don't like the solutions to the problem of climate change, because the solutions proposed often involve government interventions and regulation of polluting industries. And they don't like regulation of industry. They want free, unregulated markets. And they think that if we even put a small tax or a small regulation on industry, then that is the first step down a slippery slope to controlling all our lives and turning the whole world into a communist one world state. So the slippery slope fallacy is kind of the driving force behind why people deny climate science. I ended up remembering something my dad said to me after I finished my physics degree. And I told him, I think I'm going to actually go into cartooning rather than doing a PhD in physics.
How did that go down with your dad?
It went down like a lead balloon. He was not a fan of my bold new plan at all. And he basically said to me, if you do this, you'll end up living on the streets wearing torn jeans. And so I drew a cartoon of the example of the slippery slope fallacy from my dad, put it in the book. And I thought, that feels really good, like drawing a cartoon, debunking my dad. What else has my dad said that I could debunk in the book? And then I thought, maybe I shouldn't use the book as a personal therapy session. So that was all I drew of him.
I mean, I started looking at this in 2017, and it seems to me that each year, it's not very long, so I'm a newcomer really, but every year since 2017, it seems to have been more and more obvious that the effects of climate change are more and more difficult to ignore and deny. And here we are in 2020. I know, all right, we've got a very unusual set of circumstances with the global lockdown, although even that in itself is bringing some interesting environmental and consequences with brightening skies and less pollution. But the weather patterns and the regularity of extreme events seems to me to be difficult to ignore. Are you sensing that people are beginning to realise that the evidence is rolling in and it's becoming more and more incontrovertible? Or do you feel that there is an element of people who are just, the more it becomes obvious, the more they're digging their heels in and the more they're looking for different ways to try and pretend it's not happening?
I think the answer to that question is yes.
Okay.
Because like when you look at the general public as a whole, we've been collecting national survey data for the last 10 years. Twice a year, we at George Mason, working with Yale University, we do these big national surveys. And we've been measuring people's attitudes and beliefs about climate change. And we just see this steady increase in acceptance of climate change. And in fact, an increase in all the different measures, whether it's belief that climate change is happening, that humans are causing it, that the impacts are dangerous, and also support for climate action and support for renewables. So overall, the public are getting on board with the science. The reality of climate change is becoming clearer to everyone. At the same time, there is this very persistent 10% of the population who have been dismissive of the science. And that number has been quite static. So you're really seeing movement in the middle. The middle are becoming more concerned and alarmed, but the dismissives are sort of locked in, they're rusted on. And I kind of alluded to it earlier, but the reason why they deny the science isn't because of the science. It's not because there's not enough evidence for them. It's because they don't like the solutions to the problem.
And is that something to do with this? You mentioned a consensus gap in the book as well. That's one of the functions that you talk about in the book. Is that all tied up with that kind of phenomenon?
So the consensus gap is shrinking as well. I think that like we published a document, the Consensus Handbook, where we plotted specifically the public perception of consensus. And I think at the start of when we started doing these 10 years of measurements, it was around, I think it was around mid-50s, and now it's high 60s. So we do see that perceived consensus is going up. So it's like, maybe it's like 67% now, which is still a lot less than 97%. There is a big consensus gap, but it is shrinking over time.
It's good to hear that the as you say, the middle, the sort of, I suppose, average Joe in the street is beginning to realise that the on a balance of evidence, it's pretty clear that these guys are talking some sense. And I often think about a normal distribution curve, and in my mind's eye, I've got most people fairly unaware in the middle, just trying to go to work and earn enough money to look after their families, perfectly reasonable, nothing wrong with that. And then we've got perhaps examples like Extinction Rebellion at one end, trying to drag everybody very radically in that direction, and then perhaps the Fossil Fuel Brigade and their propaganda machine at the other end, trying to sort of hold us back a little bit. And most of us are in this large bulbous bit in the middle of the bell curve. I think the Americans call it the normal distribution curve. But your view is that the consensus in here is you think beginning to move somehow in the direction of Extinction Rebellion, and if so, what do you think? Because these are critical years in my opinion, the next perhaps 5 years, even if not 10. How do we not miss that opportunity of that momentum beginning to shift? What else do we need to do?
Yeah, that's the key question, I think. So two things. Firstly, the good news is the bell curve. It's not a symmetrical curve. It's very lopsided, but it's lopsided towards being concerned and alarmed. So it's more like a kind of or the concerned and alarmed over here. That's where the vast majority of the public are, okay. And then it drops off. So the first thing I think is important to recognize is that 58% of the US population, and I think that the dynamic is similar in the UK and Australia, albeit more polarized over here, but 58% of the population here are concerned or alarmed about climate change. And that is a statistic that not many people are aware of, not the exact number, but the fact that the majority of the public are on board with the science and the reality of climate change. They're concerned or alarmed. So that's an important statistic to be aware of. But the other important statistic is that most of those people, the concerned and alarmed, don't talk about the issue with their friends and family. They tend to self-censor because they're worried about pushback, and they don't realize that they're in the majority. And so they think that if they open their mouth and Cranky Uncle says, well, what about X, Y, or Z? And they don't have an answer, then they'll be made to look stupid. So I think that the answer to your question ultimately is we need to break that climate silence. And there are two ways to do that. There's probably lots of ways to do it, but two ways that I've been mainly pursuing is firstly, breaking the misconception that most people aren't on board with the science. So just communicating that simple statistic of 58%. And secondly, inoculating people against the arguments of cranky uncles and climate deniers, so that empowers them to talk about the issue with confidence, knowing that even if they did get pushback, that they would know how to respond. And those are two things that I set out to do with the Cranky Uncle book. I'm basically trying to arm people with the information so that they can be empowered to talk about climate change.
So on specifically the book then, we've got a physical manifestation, which I've enjoyed reading and putting my tabs on. How's that been going, first of all? And I believe there's online stuff that's going to follow this up. And am I right in saying there's even an app going to be in the pipeline at some point in the future?
Yeah, so in December and January, we did a crowdfunding campaign to develop a Cranky Uncle smartphone game. And the goal of the game being to basically use gamification to teach critical thinking and inoculate people against the techniques of denial. And it was a really successful crowdfunding campaign. We not only crowdfunded enough to develop an iPhone and an Android version, but also a multi-language version. So that after the first version of the game comes out, our next step will be to create translations of the game. And there's already interest in translating in German, French, and possibly other languages as well.
Wow.
So we're furiously developing the game. I've been drawing cartoons and posting videos of all the drawings on a daily basis. Yeah, so I kind of have awful timing in that the book came out at pretty much the same time that the pandemic hit. So instead, what I've been trying to do is improvise and create a series of videos that's trying to take the cartoons from the book and create video animation versions of them. Pretty simple animation, but just ways of making that content more accessible to people. Just trying to get those conversations going in different ways, and also making these videos a useful resource for educators. Critical thinking is hard. We're trying to get people to basically do slow thinking, do system 2 thinking. And our brains are really not hardwired to do that. We're asking them to do a very cognitively difficult task. Yeah. But if you get people to practice critical thinking through a game which uses game elements, makes it fun, you're scoring points, there's cartoons and humor, and use every incentive we can to get them to practice critical thinking over and over, that makes the task easier and easier over time.
So if people want to go and find that content, where do they go? Yeah,
if people want to get updates on how we're going with the game development, they can go to crankyuncle.com and sign up. I'm sending out a regular little email newsletter where I'm just giving people the latest Cranky news and game developments. On my blog, I've been posting all the videos, and also I have a link to my YouTube channel. I think if you go on YouTube and search for Skeptical Science, you'll find all the videos there as well.
We'll obviously leave all the information in the comment section, the description box below this video, and so people can go and find that, and to Skeptical Science, the website itself as well. All right. Well, as I say, Cranky Uncle versus Climate Change is the book, and it's out. Go to YouTube, have a look at the videos, the animated videos, and the app will be out soon in the game. So a lot to go at, and there's a great deal in here. It's a very absorbing book. It's very easy to read, and it really does have information that you can. It's got sound bites that you can use in conversations with your friends and loved ones that are easy for them to absorb as well. So I really commend you, John, for the work you've done, and thank you for that. It's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for spending some of your time with Just Have a Think today. Good luck with everything in the future. And thanks very much, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Thanks a lot, man.
That's it for this week. Big thank you, as always, to the channel supporters over at Patreon who help make these programs possible. Do please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button to help us get noticed by the YouTube search algorithm. As always, thanks very much for watching. Have a great week, and remember to just have a think. See you next week.